Certainly can.
So we are live on YouTube. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Vermont State Senate Committee on Institutions, today being February 25, 2021. I am Joe Benning, the committee chair. We also have Senator McCormick from Windsor, Senator Mazza from Grand Isle, Senator Ingalls from Essex Orleans, and Senator Parent from Franklin County. Today, we are hoping that Ledge Counsel Michael O'Grady is going to give us a lesson 101 on the 3-acre, help me with the language, Michael, 3-acre stormwater parcel. I got that one.
You could call it the 3-acre developed lands permit.
That works. And committee, I anticipate we are not going to have a very lengthy meeting. In fact, for the members of the public, we were supposed to be in an afternoon joint session of the House and the Senate, which moments ago was postponed till next week. So we really hadn't planned a lot of business this afternoon. So Michael, you have all afternoon to take as much time as you want.
Wonderful. I hope this will only take about a half an hour.
Perfect.
Are you going to share or am I going to share?
I would prefer to share, but if you
okay.
would
No,
okay.
That's absolutely wonderful. I'll
So,
make you a co-host. Just a second.
Okay, sure. I'm going to go through a document that I walked House Corrections and Institutions through on this same issue. It gives an overview of where the 3-acre developed lands permit came from, what it is intended to do, and the resources that are available for persons subject to the permit, and consequences of the state not implementing the permit. And this all revolves around the Lake Champlain TMDL and the commitments that the state made in order to get EPA approval of the implementation plan for the Lake Champlain TMDL.
Michael, let me freeze you for just a second. Keeping in mind that we are on YouTube, where we have the possibility of people who are totally unfamiliar with all vernacular that you might be using. We are trying to make sure we bring it right down to ground level to explain every time something like TMDL is brought up, what that exactly means for public edification.
Sure, and I intend to do that,
Okay.
and I will start to do that right now. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the first thing you need to understand is where the 3-acre permit is coming from, and that requires going back to looking at the Federal Clean Water Act. Federal Clean Water Act requires states to adopt water quality standards for all of their surface waters. And those standards are intended to, or supposed to, maintain the traditional uses of the water, recreation, irrigation, aquatic biota, etc. So that's what water quality standards are supposed to do. And every 3 years, the state is supposed to go out and assess all of their surface waters to determine if they are meeting the water quality standards. If they are not meeting the water quality standards, you'll see in the middle of this page, they shall establish for those waters a total maximum daily load. The total maximum daily load means that that target for the pollutant that is impairing the water. So the goal is to reduce that pollutant to a level so that the water is no longer impaired. The total maximum daily load is basically the destination for a clean surface water. Senator Benning, does that do enough to explain kind of the common level?
So far, so good.
All right. So EPA is supposed to approve all TMDLs. And all TMDLs are supposed to have an implementation plan with them. So the TMDL is the destination. The implementation plan is the roadmap on how you get there. But if EPA disapproves a TMDL, then EPA has 30 days after disapproval to issue its own TMDL and plan for that water. So I want to repeat that. If the state plan is disapproved, EPA has to issue its own plan for the water so that the water will be cleaned up. So let's remember that. Well, Lake Champlain, as you all know, is impaired for phosphorus. And what does that mean? It means that phosphorus is causing certain traditional uses of the water to be impaired. Specifically, it's impairing recreational uses and aquatic biota in the lake. And therefore, the state had to adopt a TMDL, the destination for phosphorus, to get reduced so that it's no longer impaired and those traditional uses can return to what they should be. And that was first approved by EPA in 2002. But an environmental group petitioned EPA, I believe it was in 2009, to say that EPA wasn't meeting its obligations for review of the TMDL for Lake Champlain, and that the TMDL, as approved by EPA, wasn't meeting the Federal Clean Water Act standards. EPA, after some discussion, negotiation, and a few hearings, ultimately agreed with that environmental group. And on January 24, 2011, issued this letter to Vermont saying that they were disapproving the 2002 TMDL for Lake Champlain. And as I just described to you, they acknowledged that they now have the requirement, the duty to issue the new TMDL for the lake. But they say that they hope to work collaboratively with the state in order to revise the new TMDL. And I'll discuss why they want to work collaboratively with the state. So EPA only has a few tools that it can enforce in Vermont in order to reach a TMDL for any water. And it's basically the direct permitting of discharges to waters. And so there's only a few categories of those types of permits. There's what you would imagine, the traditional wastewater flowing out of a pipe. There's also something called the construction general permit. When people are going to disturb 1 acre or more of land, they have to get a permit. There's also something called the multi-sector general permit, which is for certain types of industry to control stormwater from their property. And there's also something called the MS4, which is for municipal stormwater control for certain sizes of municipalities. EPA implementing any of those probably would never get to a clean Lake Champlain. Probably wouldn't have enough authority through implementation of those to get to a clean Lake Champlain. But they have one other tool. It's called residual designation authority, where they can require any contribution of a pollutant to a water to get a permit and to meet certain standards. And so that's really significant authority. And in order for the state to clean up the lake and avoid residual designation authority, the state agency, the administration said, hey, we will work with TMDL, we will work with EPA collaboratively to come up with a plan that meets the TMDL, that gets us to that destination of a clean lake without having to go through EPA's onerous regulatory authority. But EPA also needs something called reasonable assurances. Under Federal Clean Water Act law, when there is non-point sources that are contributing to an impairment EPA needs to have a reasonable assurance that the control measures will lead to the cleanup of the lake. And so they had to develop this implementation plan with Vermont, and they had to agree to this plan before they agreed to the TMDL. So they agreed to the roadmap before they agreed to what the destination was going to be. And part of that roadmap was that all of the relevant state agencies, A&R, Agency of Ag, they had to work diligently in order to develop the types of policy commitments that EPA required in order to provide reasonable assurances. Well, what were those policy commitments? Well, one of them is to develop treatment or a permit for untreated, unmanaged runoffs from existing developed lands. That is the 3-acre developed lands permit. So EPA wanted a policy commitment, a reasonable assurances for controlled non-point source pollution. And one of those commitments from the state is the 3-acre developed lands permit. And they note in that implementation plan that these commitments will require new and increased efforts from nearly every sector of society, including state government, municipalities, farmers, developers, businesses, and homeowners. This was at the time referred to as the all-in approach, that the state and all of its citizens were all in on the cleanup of the waters of the state. So then EPA issued its TMDL. They had already approved the roadmap, and now they approved the destination. But a unique part of the destination, the TMDL for Lake Champlain, is that EPA included a new mechanism in the TMDL. It's called the accountability framework. It's basically the standards that the state has to meet and when they need to meet them that are crucial to the long-term success of implementing the TMDL. And you will see that one of those crucial steps was by December 30th, 2017, that the state had to issue a final developed lands general permit. So it had to issue that 3-acre general permit by December 30th, 2017. And then EPA said that they were going to start issuing report cards to assess Vermont's success in meeting these milestones. And if EPA finds that Vermont has failed to make satisfactory progress, EPA may take one or more of the following actions. They're going to go back to their regulatory permitting authority. Basically, they're saying, hey, Vermont, if you're not meeting your policy commitments, if you're not giving us the reasonable assurances that you said you would, your implementation plan, we're going to go back to our regulatory authority and start requiring more of your activities to have direct discharge permits. So that led to Act 64 of 2015, where this General Assembly, or the General Assembly, enacted what was called the Vermont Clean Water Act. And part of the Vermont Clean Water Act was this prohibition on stormwater discharges from impervious surface of 3 or more acres in size without first obtaining an individual permit or coverage when the discharge was never permitted or was permitted prior to the 2002 Stormwater Management Manual. Now, the A&R Stormwater Management Manual is what property owners use to implement stormwater controls in order to get a permit. And so basically what the General Assembly said in 2015, if you were never permitted or you were permitted under something prior to the 2002 Stormwater Management Manual, you now have to get a permit that meets the existing Stormwater Management Manual if your property is 3 or more acres in size. So that further led to the general permit requirement, where General Assembly told A&R that they had to issue the 3-acre developed lands permit, and they had to have a schedule for it. And for impervious surface located in Champlain, Memphremagog, or stormwater impaired waters, it had to be issued on or before October 1, 2023. and then for all other impervious surface in the state no later than 2033. So that's where you get the directive for, that's where the 3-acre permit came from as part of the policy commitments or reasonable assurances for the Lake Champlain TMDL. The General Assembly made the 3-acre permit applicable across the entire state, according to that schedule I just showed you. And then EPA came out to do its report cards. And in its first report card, it said that Vermont was meeting 25 of the 28 policy commitments in the TMDL. But one of those policy commitments that it wasn't meeting was the 3-acre developed lands general permit. So it said, A&R Vermont, you need to get on that. So it came back again to do another report card in June of 2020. And it said now that Vermont was meeting 29 of 30 policy commitments, and the one that it was not meeting was the 3-acre developed lands permit. And it said if the state still has not issued that permit by September 4th, 2020, EPA will be forced to give the state a failing grade on the TMDL and then go back to its EPA's regulatory authority and start permitting non-point source discharges as point sources, start requiring additional activities and lands to get direct discharge permits from EPA. So the state didn't want that to happen. The state issued the 3-acre developed lands permit December 1, 2020. That was after EPA's drop dead date, but EPA said, okay, we can live with that. So this is, I won't go through the terms of the 3-acre general permit. It basically is what I said before, requiring those people with 3 acres of impervious surface to obtain a permit if their property was never stormwater permitted or was permitted under something pre-2002 stormwater management manual. So what is the state doing about the 3-acre developed lands permit? Well, the A&R's got a couple of pretty good sites that are informing people about the requirements. In addition, A&R did an inventory of all 3-acre sites or all sites around the state that would require the 3-acre permit. They have notified property owners of their requirement to come into compliance with the 3-acre permit. And because it starts, the timeline requires the permit to be first rolled out in Champlain and Memphremagog, et cetera. Those are the property owners that are receiving notice of their requirement, their duty to come into compliance. So there is a list of the 3-acre properties that are on, it's on A&R's website. So if you haven't received notice or you're not sure that you are subject to it, you can look up whether or not you are a 3-acre property. And then they have a website about what assistance that they are giving to applicants or those people that need the permit, who can help them, is funding available. They note that the agency is currently developing a funding plan and will release it in the near future. And for purposes of the state, well, there are several provisions in state statute. Well, there are 3-acre properties that the state owns that are going to be subject to this permit. And you're starting to see the state planning for that and requesting money for that. So AOT has requested money, and the Department of Forest and Parks has requested money for compliance with the 3-acre general permit for properties that they own or control. So that leads you to, what if the state does not comply? Well, we're back to EPA's permit authority. And so you'll see what they can permit. They can permit direct discharges from a point source. They can permit construction. They can permit stormwater from industrial sites. They can permit the municipal stormwater from specified towns, and they can permit farms. that have an actual discharge or are proposing to discharge, but then they have residual designation authority. And this is their hook. They can require anyone on a case-by-case basis to get a permit when it determines the discharge contributes to a violation of water quality standards. The discharge is a significant contributor of a pollutant to a water, or controls are needed for the discharge based on waste load allocations that are part of the TMDL that address the pollutants of concern. So if the state decides that it can't meet the 3-acre permit, or it just fails to implement the 3-acre permit, EPA has the authority to say it's not meeting the TMDL, to revoke the implementation plan for the TMDL, and to implement its regulatory authority, including the residual designation authority, which ultimately would allow them to require 3-acre properties to be permitted. So you're in a bit of a loop. Even if you don't want to do the 3-acre permit, EPA has the authority to say that those properties that meet residual designation authority have to get a permit anyway. So that's basically the overview of the 3-acre developed lands permit. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Do you have any questions?
Committee, questions, comments? Senator Parent.
Michael, on enforcing these, and he's probably, it's more of a, on the natural resource end versus our buildings, but I've got a development in St. Albans town that has reached out to me, and I've been working with Peter and his team, but I just would like your take. They were built in the 80s. It's a public road, but there's no homeowners association. And so there's nobody to send the 3-acre permitting to, unless they, does the town take on that permitting piece, or does that group have to form a homeowners association now just for this permit?
So I forgot to tell you this when I started, and I should have. I live in a 3-acre community, and I live in the exact kind of 3-acre community that Senator Parent just referenced. We pre-80, no homeowners association, and the developer failed to properly transfer the stormwater permit to the property owners through a deed. So there are too many attorneys in my neighborhood to form a homeowners association right now, because they all know what that means. And basically what the state has done is they sent a notice letter to all property owners in the community saying that it's our obligation to apply for the 3-acre permit. There have been property owners in our neighborhood that are working with the town. There is a question of whether or not what's called the MS4 permit for South Burlington, and it would apply in St. Albans too, because there's an MS4 permit in St. Albans, whether or not that is sufficient to cover these developments, and whether or not, when the municipalities adopted the MS4, they basically adopted the responsibility for bringing these what are called orphan communities into compliance. That's something that's going to play out over the next year or so. Your town manager, South Burlington's town manager, probably Rutland's town manager, where I believe some other orphans are probably going to be working with A&R to figure out how they're going to meet the requirements for these orphan systems. Whether or not
I'll ask you a little bit. I work for the town of St. Albans now, my day job, and so the town managers put it on my desk in my day jobs. I'm trying to figure it out there too. So that's why.
So, yeah, I think that's part of the conversation is going to be with A&R and how the multi-sector applies to the orphans.
Okay. We do have a new stormwater utility coming in to meet our MS4 commitments. So I I assume a lot of the work's going to go to that in some of these places as well.
Right, and that's a conversation I had with South Burlington's utility director. It's like, what role was the stormwater fee that people have been paying for years? What is that going to play in the compliance with this requirements? Again, that's something that's going to play out. It's probably going to come down to this: the town's going to pay a share, and then the homeowners have to pay a share, and that share is probably just going to be allocated. The town has the ability to create what are called special assessment districts, and then to assess that way. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the ultimate consequence or result for some of these orphan systems.
Is there anything since it seems like a problem, is there anything the legislature could do to help find that solution for these folks?
Well, the legislature tried to eliminate orphans back maybe about 10, 12 years ago now. They set up what was called the Orphan Stormwater Fund to basically try to give money to these developments to form associations and get permitted. It didn't really happen, my community at the time was a prime example. It was like a murderer's row of attorneys, and it was just like there was no way that I couldn't even agree to get my neighbor to put his fence on his property, let alone like to get him to agree to something like this, and it's just like it's going to be a difficult issue. But one of the things that the General Assembly, I think, is going to have to address is the cost of this permit to nonprofits, churches, schools. I was in House Ag Committee early today, and Representative Norris, whose wife is the chair of the Addison County Fairs, he stopped me and said, "I see you're going into Senate institutions on the 3-acre developed permit." And I said, "Yes." And he's like, "You need to know that the estimate is it's going to cost Addison County Fair Days $800,000 to come into compliance with the 3-acre developed lands permit." And because they were there well before pre-2002, they never had the requisite permit. There's a ton, I think he said 19 acres of impervious surface there. And so one of the things I think you're going to hear about is providing assistance to some of these properties to come into compliance.
Senate Ag, I think it might have been this. I know we've heard from the fairs in both of mine, but in one of them, they said that the Champlain Valley Expo was going to be like $3 million to comply.
Yep. We don't have that money in institutions.
I have to find it somewhere, because the hard part is as Michael says, is even if we let them out of it, sounds like the feds are going to make us do it anyway.
What's the purpose behind the actual dollar amount?
For the
permit. What is it that's
the retrofitting work? I think.
Right. The $3 million isn't for the permit. The $3 million is to implement the manual, the mechanisms that are necessary in order to get the permit. Your stormwater retention pond, your infiltration, your berms, the repaving, digging up and repaving. That's what's going to cost the money. The permit itself, it's not a cheap permit, but it's pittance in comparison with what you're going to have to do to comply.
So I'm assuming all of our state parks are included in this process. And I'm thinking now about the Lemuel Valley Rail Trail. It's probably only 20 feet wide, but going for 93 miles, I'm sure there's quite a bit of acreage there.
I believe that the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, because it has an Act 250 permit, correct? I believe it would have been required to get a stormwater permit, plus it was post 2002. So it definitely, it most likely has a stormwater permit.
Okay.
But yes, parks, state lands, that was a discussion in 2015. There was actually a proposal to exempt state properties from most of the permitting requirements. Because I think some of the leadership at some of the agencies saw the writing on the wall. But again, the message was all in, and that wasn't consistent with the all in approach.
Something tells me that something's got to change. I mean, we can't have all the fairs shutting down. That's just unacceptable. I don't know. Is there conversation going on someplace right now in another committee about trying to help the fairs, for instance?
I have not heard the conversation, but I have not been in the ag committees all day long. Senator Parent may know more than I do with regard to Senate Ag. But I did reference in my walkthrough of that document that A&R says it's working on proposed funding sources, and it's going to propose funding for financial assistance. I don't know what that is, but it's a public statement that they have made on their website that they're going to propose a funding source.
We haven't come up with a way or any thought on funding, so we're all waiting to see. I wonder, can we use clean water money for some of this work?
Yes. If you wanted to redirect or specifically earmark some of the clean water funds for 3-acre compliance or assistance for those that are in need, you could definitely do so. You did set up the structure 2 years ago where you're going to have these local partners that are going to be implementing water quality projects in order to reach compliance with TMDLs across the state. They will have the ability to use those funds that they receive to provide assistance to 3-acre properties as well. So to an extent, you've set up a mechanism to help 3-acre property owners, but you still probably need to contemplate what the funds are going to be.
Other questions? Michael, you've been very helpful this afternoon. Not necessarily news we wanted to hear, but it's been very instructive.
That's basically the response I received from House Corrections. They were like, "Oh, Jesus, thank you, but no, thank you."
Understandable.
So.
I have a feeling that the conversation is going to continue in some form. I just haven't figured out how institutions may end up being more involved.
Yeah, I think you're probably going to see it most specifically through the state agencies that have identified their need to comply, because it's something that most likely qualifies as a capital expense, and so they will probably look to you for some assistance.
Okay. Well, don't see any other hands or questions, so thank you very much for coming along.
You're welcome. Have a good afternoon.
See ya. That technically takes care of our meeting this afternoon. So Denise, if you would like to take us off of YouTube.